Hi, everyone, and welcome back to 404 Policy Not Found, a new podcast from Brain Trainer where we dive into how digital and AI systems are shaping our world, who they serve, who they leave out, and how we can reimagine them for a more just, human-centered future. For our first episode in this series, we're introducing our co-hosts Renee Black, Norma Valdez, and Alex Tveit as they share their unique perspectives on systems thinking, the role of AI in positively disrupting existing structures, and why radical collaboration is essential for change. We'll also give you a glimpse of what's to come next in the series. All right, let's jump in.
So we are going to start off by talking a little bit about systems thinking and how we're approaching it from each one of our perspectives and angles. So first of all, I don't want to assume that people know what system thinking is. So often what I do when talking to audiences about AI for social impact, but through a systems lens, is that I talk about a coffee cup because that's something that everybody knows. And this is we're using a coffee cup that can be any type of product, but it seems simple, but it's actually fairly complex. When you were thinking about it from a systems angle and you start thinking about what supply chain and what's the product made of in terms of the coffee cup, the sleeve. Usually there's a plastic lid. I don't have one. And that then involves oil and processing. You can look at the coffee and coffee bean production and the labor that goes into that. So understanding the full supply chain, the logistics, the labor conditions of the people who are involved in producing the coffee beans. And then you can look at the tail end after we've consumed the coffee, what happens with the coffee cup? Does it go into recycling plant? What does the coffee do to our bodies? And that's really to understand that something as simple as a coffee cup touches so many different systems. It touches healthcare, it touches labor, it touches technology, it touches oil and energy. And similarly, when we talk about AI, it's really transformational in that it touches upon every one of our societal and environmental systems. So when I'm thinking about AI for social impact, it's really through that lens and trying to understand both how to become practical and tangible. What does it do on the ground? What are the challenges and opportunities on the ground in use of AI or how AI has been used up until now too? But also how can we take a systems approach to understanding how are the interconnected systems being changed in various ways, in positive and negative ways. So that's usually how I come into thinking about systems thinking within AI for social impact. But I would be interested in both of your thoughts and perspectives, how you bring systems thinking into the conversation that we're going to be exploring in the series.
Yeah, and from the frame of the work that I do, all thinking about education, trying to make what seems to be very complicated into like the easiest possible um, way possible. For me, it just comes down to this: it's like our world is being disrupted in several ways. In technology, government, etc., etc. And so when something disrupts the world, it changes the way things that we need to be doing things in. So how do we keep up with those changes? What is it that we need to understand about how certain connections, how certain things are happening and how do we respond to them? And so for me, it's like systems thinking around AI or technology or digital age is all about figuring out the ways in which we can explore what are those changes and then how do we map out understanding that will build agency. Because I think often what happens as much as the people that engage with that are not even in any way connected to the work of AI or technology like family members, etc. It's like it's like I talk about the work that I do and then they're like, yeah, but how does that affect me directly? There's this thinking that the stuff is very external, but it's actually not so external. It's actually affecting us as a society. We're part of the society in ways that we just don't see. There's invisible things. And so I think like the idea of system thinking and exploring this concept simply just brings light to the invisible.
Yeah, so I think the issue, very expansive because you can look at the supply chain side of an issue, like as with AI, but where's the data coming from? Has it been come by consensually? Who are the people that are inputting that data? Where are they located? You can look at all that side of AI. You can also look at the output side of AI and look at how is it being impacting on our society, on our personal lives, on democratic integrity. And then, this is where we are right now is really an evolution from the platform era, and the platform era has, I think that's where we really started to see on the technology side a lot of the ways in which systems thinking is urgently needed, because you start to see, for example, on something like search, there's a fairly complex system of markets that end up regulating what kind of content you see. So, for example, if I'm on a Meta platform, I see an ad, and that is not served up to me actually by edits. It's served up by a complex network of markets that basically run across a whole wide range of different value chains. But one of the big challenges is that one company, Google, owns more than 80% of that value chain, and because of that, they can make decisions that are not in your interest, and in ways that end up hurting consumers. And so, this idea that we are, that we're in this era where these value chains have become very normalized, and behind them there is an invisible and unregulated set of transactions that occur for which nobody can be accountable. But not only that, there's not competition because there's so much market concentration in this one company, and it's only getting worse because the pre-existing concentration makes it impossible for anybody else to compete. And so we can expect to see that concentration getting a lot worse. And so that has typically meant and resulted in a lack of accountability. And so, as we think about this idea of what does it look like when we have responsible technology ecosystems, what it looks like to think about that in systems, it means that we are able to interrogate and understand different parts of the system, so that we are, so that there's not these embedded conflicts of interest that are not aligned with the public good, and where people are able to act on their own interest. And right now, that's just not the case.
I wanted to just comment on, trying to see how, like how important it is that we understand, more of us understand how certain decisions are being made when it comes to development of technology. Because literally I was watching a 45-minute sort of conversation that OpenAI does, that Sam Altman does with the developers. And they were talking about what are some of the shortcomings and learnings and future that they see in terms of like training newer models. So like specifically like 5 and then 5.5 eventually. And I was paying close attention, because I'm like, sometimes they're trying not to say too many things because they don't want to reveal, what goes behind the curtain, so to speak. But there was a moment there where one of them was talking about how there was something that came up during their training that worried them, but they didn't go into specifics about what that was. It's like, no, we're not going to share here, right? Fine. But what became clear was that, and some of this, shaping the model and preparing the model for full release, some of these debates and questions are happening internally at OpenAI. And sometimes it's as simple as creating a Slack channel, because they mentioned they use Slack for their communications. So there's a Slack channel, I think, where it's pretty popular actually when certain oddities show up. But then it's like OpenAI is just like the most common model is ChatGPT, right? And it's like whatever that they create, whatever they decide within a closed group, within a closed model, it's affecting a lot of us in ways that we probably don't perceive. It gets more prominent when the total user keeps growing, because lately when they released their new image model, they went through a spur of 130 million new users after the new image generation model that they upgraded and got created. So, and of course we have 700 million images that get generated because of the new model. But yeah, anyways, I wanted to add to that, make it real.
Yeah, no, I think as we've talked about it before as well, like it's often the unseen, and especially when we're talking about the systems level, what people hear about is ChatGPT and OpenAI and maybe Copilot, maybe Claude, but it's all the unseen uses in healthcare, for example. Whenever our social media, which is way before Gen AI, influenced our society, I want to put a question to both of you, because we've talked about the chance or the fact that AI is transformative. It's going to disrupt most of our systems. What are the ways that we can move towards positive disruption? Because we're seeing education did not wake up to really evolve with how do we deal with social media. there's a dead internet theory that is maybe coming into play because people are finding their social media is flooded with AI. So there's a chance that people move away from your main platforms because they want to see more relationality, smaller communities. You see Blue Sky coming up that is decentralized in various ways. How do you think what are two questions? How do we see ways to disrupt in positive ways? And two, do you believe the dead internet theory? And is there therefore a chance to rebuild the internet because of the transforming power of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly like to think that we are on the cusp of a potentially new moment. I mean, I think that it's never been more salient how problematic the way that the internet works is right now. I mean, it's so driven by private interest, and especially when you're talking about social media platforms that present themselves as a public square, but they're not a public square. They are private companies that act on private interests consistently and often in ways are very out of line with what is good for people and communities and democracies. And so that privatization of what's sort of positioned as a public space is very, very concerning. And so, and I mean, if you think back to the start of the internet, I mean, the start of the internet was actually a really exciting time. It was a lot of exploration and finding weird sort of kind of circles, and cat videos, and it was kind of a fun time. And what it's become has just become such a distorted Frankenstein of itself. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think, interest and momentum, especially because the companies have moved away from anything that looks like how to sort of strengthen integrity. You have really kind of know what's going on. You don't know that you're acting and talking to real people. You don't know that you're interacting with real content that's sort of generated by a human. There's so many questions. The amount of energy that goes in right now to knowing if you're talking to a legitimate person is quite frankly insane. And so, I think that we can do so much better than this. And so how do we mobilize, all this intelligence to kind of get us to a much better place? That sort of is a lot about trust, and how do we kind of, um, build and learn rather than destroy, because a lot of what we've seen in social media has been just very destructive. I mean, yes, you meet some great people, you can connect with some friends, but the incentive structures that are created by these platforms are really problematic and are hurting communities, and they're not helping us to make sense of what is going on in the world. They're not helping us to contextualize where our positions sort of situate within a broader spectrum. And that is making it a lot harder for us to solve collective problems.
Yeah, for me, I'm gonna go back to the word that we use that I think needs to be used up more and understood more as like the need for radical collaboration. And I'm gonna give you an example of this because yesterday I was at a meeting where an NDP candidate that is for the riding. I can't say his name, but he's a candidate for the riding in North Etobicoke, which is here in Toronto. We were talking about how there are low voting turnouts, right? There's not a lot of people turning out to vote, and just the lack of civic engagement. And one of those groups that the candidate was talking about that sees as being less engaged, according to I can say there's from the NDP. They're not saying the name. That it was quote unquote the youth, right? And then specifically, it's like why do you think? Why do you think they're not engaged? Because they're like this on their phones, and it's like, okay, but that might be the reality, but that just means that you need to just find a way to get to them through the things that they're watching. Of like if they're hanging out on TikTok and then watching reels on Instagram, and then find a way to get to them. It's just because you can't just dismiss them because it's like it's their own fault because they're into the phone and they are missing out on the messages that we're giving out. But like you just need to make sure you're in that messaging. So and if people are like this with their headphones, then do podcasts and do ways in which you can actually reach out to people. So like, and it just seems like from the discussions that I had yesterday with this candidate and also talking about AI. I ask is like, so what's the NDP's perspective on AI? And there seems to be like this perception, which is not a lie, to say that AI and AI innovation is very, tied into, it's very corporative, and it's like this oligarchic sort of structure that is being constructed around AI is something that, we're trying to not be a part of. But I was like, wait a second, I understand that completely. but the technology is here, and as an NDP, as a political party that's so influential in the country, I think I might need to take a different approach to be more wholesome in this approach, right? So I directly just said, we can talk more about this. I would be happy to talk to somebody about this, but just to say, it's like, in terms of like, how do we need to respond? We cannot do the things that we did before, right? We need to talk to other people. We need to collaborate, and we need to see like, hey, maybe my way of approaching this wouldn't be the way to use now, because really the circumstances are way different now, that it's just not going to work, and it's just going to miss the mark.
Yeah, I would sort of jump in with a couple things, because like I agree with you on a lot of that, but I do also kind of want to flag that the fact that we are so addicted to our phones is a product of a public policy failure. We have not been able to change the incentive structures. There's a lot of intentionality that goes in when a platform designs something that is trying to extend your time online. They're trying to get you to stay more online because it provides more visibility to ads, and that provides more revenue to the companies, and that is a very problematic incentive. We know that there are very clear correlations in terms of mental health and self-harm for kids that basically are online. So yes, on the one hand, we do need to reach people where they are, and we also need to regulate platforms so they're not as addictive, and that we are spending more time in the real world. But this is not a good move. We are moving towards the AI sector would have us all moving towards a place where we are basically just interacting with AI all the time in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in school, whether it's in our bedroom, whether it's in our wherever we are, in our car. So I think that there is this. I hope that we can get back to some fundamental of what it is to be human, and make sure we don't lose the human in our interactions, and sort of have this balance of actually having people showing up without being stuck into their phones, but also still being able to use AI in a responsible way. So this isn't an anti-AI and anti-tech agenda. This is, what does it look like when it is a lot healthier than it is right now?
It's a lot about talking and redefining and reimagining relationship with technology, because it's obviously unhealthy. I don't think Canada has done a particularly good job in terms of regulation, whether or not it be AI or looking at social media. I think it's Australia now that's moved towards banning social media for children under 12. But worldwide, we're heading towards less regulation on the AI side, especially coming out of the Paris Summit. But I think I want to just go back to slightly the connection point, because I think, and I'll draw on some background and stories from a colleague, Blaine Cook, who I work with through the Climate Risk Institute in Canada, because he was there early stages with Twitter, and like at one point he was the only one working on Twitter. The intention for Twitter was actually to be, and he comes from a sociologist activism background, so it was actually rooted in being a tool for activism. And when they saw collectively that it was used during the Arab Spring, that's what it was intended for.
Mhm.
Like that will to see then what it turned into because of shareholder profits is fascinating and really sad. But then you see when Renee, you talked about the public square, or Sam Harris, what I like following in terms of his thoughts and his own addiction of Twitter when speaking about it as that it's a fallacy that it was a town hall. But it's not a town hall, because nobody would spew hate in the middle of a town hall, because if you did, people will come up to you and say, maybe that's changing based on what we've seen recently, so maybe that's wrong. But you would think that the village or the town would come together and say, no, you shouldn't just spew pure hate. So I think it comes down to, how do we redefine our relationship with technology so that it's not shareholder profit driven? And obviously that's a big ask, becoming a bigger and bigger ask in the current environment. But unless we, to your point, Renee, and similar to what you're talking about, Norman, focus on the disconnect and understand the underlying motive that is not only shareholder profit driven, but it's purely just to keep eyeballs on the screen and what that does. How can we reshape so that technology works with us, so that it's, to abundant intelligence's wording, making kin with machines, so that it's beneficial and positive, so that the relationship isn't extractive, it's actually infusive, and it's connecting us rather than detracting? technology in itself shouldn't be something bad, but the way we're using it is bad. The way we're developing and deploying it is creating polarization, is creating issues that are perpetuating or widening divides and inequities. I'm just wondering how can we move towards when money is going in to deregulating it, DEI is being eroded. How do we start moving in the other direction? How do we make sure that we're actually developing our new relationship with technology in the face of what is happening in general?
Yeah, from my side, it's once again, I think it needs to be a coordinated response, and you cannot have a coordinated response if you're not talking to each other. Like we, at least you and I, Alex, like from the lens of social impact, from that, supporting that and working with organizations and building coalitions and collectives, having a voice, but also we also talk about cross-sectorial, like because this issue is so big and there's so much power that is mounted behind it. Like we're talking about companies that are worth in the trillions of dollars evaluated, like Microsoft, and they have a lot of power and influence. And if you don't have an amount of power that can in some way not compare, but at least have the tie-in with like government is with you and academia is with you and like some corporations that are actually also concerned about this, because at the end of the day, the people driving these corporations that are thinking about profit and all that, at the end of the day, they are fathers, also their parents, and some of them are grandfathers, grandmothers. They gotta be, they do, I think a lot of them, not necessarily like all of them, but a lot of them do think about, their newer generations, just like we think about the environment, right? So I think there's an opportunity there to nurture that and see like, let's just be real about this, right? When we think about the environment, let's just be real. You want to be negating that there's climate change? It's like in your face, like it's happening, and like that. I think if you just continue to build agency within like this topic and other topics that are also very important to cover, it's just really, when it comes down to it, we need to get our roll-up sleeves right now, because the flip side of not doing that is, as you said, where the things seem to be heading right now, and like deregulation and like those things are not good for us humans. So can we just make it so that it's better for us, not just in the short term, but also for new generations?
I mean, I'm very skeptical that the companies are people that are willing to act in the interest of humanity, given the very long record they have demonstrated of doing exactly the opposite. So I don't put any faith there. I do really think this comes down to, three things. People need to kind of change their mindsets around this. That is one major vector. They need to understand like what is happening behind the scenes that is manipulating their experiences and sort of driving these terrible outcomes and harmful experiences that have just become very normalized. I mean, the fact that this, Alex, you talked about this kind of somebody yelling in the town square, the fact that this is happening online has started to normalize it offline. And I think that that's very problematic. So I think people is one part of this, like what is happening is not okay. And this is not a political issue. This is not a right or left issue, or at least it shouldn't be. And if it's become politicized, it's because that has become the wedge in which companies have used to try to prevent regulation from happening. Ultimately, these problems affect everyone. The second vector is policy. Of course, we need policy. It's very hard to imagine how you get there without having policy. But the third vector is innovation. I hope that there are people who, if people try to do, and companies try to do this one-off on their own, they're not going to be able to, it's going to be much harder to succeed. But there's efforts to try to build collective alternatives to the existing status quo that are more focused on decentralization and that I think are a much healthier way forward. And so if you think about, for example, Blue Sky is built on the AT protocol, the idea here is that you would end up having all socials going forward, building on this protocol. And then that way, if at some point I get annoyed with Blue Sky, I can leave and go to some other platform and I can take my data with me. And that is a powerful signal to the market that you have betrayed the trust of somebody. So, so the the markets, I think, will respond to the fact that there is movement within a particular domain when this happens, and will be a lot more responsive to how people are feeling. Right now, there's no such a responsiveness because there's this concentration of power within a handful of companies that that not only run the largest social media platforms in the world, but have used the data that has been collected on us since we created accounts to train their AI models, which is certainly not something I consented to when I signed up to my account in 2006. And that's not even talking about all the authors and artists whose data has gone into the training of AI models non-consensually, which is a very big risk to their livelihoods. And so, yes, I'm very excited about the possibility of AI, but the fact that it is done so much on this economy where people's careers and livelihoods, their expertise is being eroded and monetized, that people are basically training to replace themselves in their jobs, and that this concentration of power is just going to get so much worse. That is not an acceptable future. So we need a different paradigm. We need something where we are more control of our data, because the alternative is not a.
And I think that before we round off now, just reflecting back on, I think that's why it's coming back to the systems part of this, systems thinking part of this is so important, because it's not just about one thing. It's about reimagining education and changing education as a response both to social media, but as we're moving with the technology, how can education be an asset? It's about healthcare and our response and the value of working with the technology instead of having it pose more and more problems, perpetuating biases and inequities. It's about understanding capital systems that, to your point, are extractive, and that's both on the material side, but it's also what it's doing to our systems on our data side towards being more infusive. But it's really a systems level understanding of how do we coordinate all these efforts? How do we make sure that regulation actually speaks to different other systems so that they understand that it's not about innovating, and if we regulate it, it's taking down our ability to innovate. Nothing could be further from the truth. If we have diverse ways of providing perspectives and insights into the regulation, how we're evolving this, that's a strength. It infuses and empowers our economy, our communities, makes us more resilient. Deregulating and doing it in the minds of techno-optimism or shareholder profit-driven will extract any ability to create that resilience or empowerment.
Yeah, I like to see how, some of these struggles are reflected in other areas. One very specific one is like, you were part of this too, Alex, the Future of Goods Wellbeing Summit. They're of course a different topic altogether, but like one of the reasons, like it's been cited as a reason why there's a lot of degradation of the quality of work is the focus on return of investment, ROI, and the bottom line. When that's not human-centered, right? That's just another example of something not being human-centered, but that causes a problem for our society. And so, the thing is, like, it just shows up in different places, and it's just like, what do we do about that not being the focus? We need to close up, but like, I'm just gonna ask Renee to talk about what people can expect from upcoming episodes on this series about system thinking, like the importance about system thinking. From my perspective, it's like, all the people that we're going to be talking to, interviewing, and gather reflections, is just, they need to have that variety of minds who are experts and who are cognizant about different angles of this thing. Because I always like to use these examples, like, this thing that we're experiencing is very gigantic. It's kind of like a Godzilla, and not one person has the full view scope. But we need to be sharing our different perspectives and lenses to have a very fulsome view. Yeah, and I'll let Renee close the episode, talk about what we can expect from the series.
Sure. I think our goal for the series is, first of all, take us a little bit out of the. I think there's a big challenge that there's these narratives that have been out there that have really been trying to shape our relationship with AI, and so just being a lot more intentional about interrogating those narratives, where they come from, what purpose they serve, and why why we need to be really sort of skeptical and think a lot more intentionally about what makes sense, actually. So that would be number one. Number two is thinking about what does it look like? Try to imagine the end state. Try to imagine the end state of what it looks like when it works a lot better than it does right now. And then number three, like looking at different innovations to try and take us out of a bit of a sense of helplessness, because I think when you are feeling like you're in this world where you are dealing with these asymmetrical powers and technologies and wealth, it can feel very overwhelming. And so I mean, I think that having the ability to imagine alternatives requires knowing what those alternatives are. Like there's things that are happening out there that the vast majority of the public are not aware of. And so shining a light on some of those ideas can, I think, really start to help and break that sort of sense of helplessness. So, how do we start to kind of normalize this idea that we're not helpless? Because I think that that's like a very critical way forward to start to break the system.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to end it. We're just going to say to everybody to stay tuned for upcoming episodes on this series. We hope to do was to frame, what is citizen thinking, some of the preview of the kinds of topics that we'll be breaking down with other people, with other experts. Yeah, thank you for listening, and until next time.